In this video, we'll be adding a drag space warp on top of our particles to slow or drag things down just a bit. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the drag, it can be used in a scene to reduce a particle's velocity by a specified amount over a specified time frame. It'll come in handy for us here as we try to dampen the speed and direction of our smoke's travel. I'll be using a file named Project Smoko2 to get us going. Okay, let's change back to 4 views and we'll drop a drag space warp directly on top of our super spray. Now, because the orientation of the drag warp does indeed make a difference, I'll be creating mine in the top view. Once I've got myself in a position, back over on the right in the space warps, I'll click on Drag. Now, back in the top view, we can easily see the super spray icon, which is dressed in orange. Let's create the drag directly on top of that. Once I've placed it in my scene, I'll change its icon size to 25. You'll find that down at the bottom of the drag settings. I can then hit Z for zoom extent selected to make sure I've got good placement of the drag warp inside all 3 orthographic views. Now, once we've done that, we're going to want to activate the bind to space warp command, then bind the super spray to the drag space warp. You can also go the other direction, the drag to the super spray, if you'd like to do that instead. I'm going to make my connection in the top view where I think it's most easily done. Okay, once we have that in place, let's return to the select mode by typing Q on the keyboard. Then we'll go back and select the drag icon and return to the perspective view full screen. Now, once we're there, we'll go ahead and play things back. Now, during play, you'll notice the drag is currently being set to only affect our particles for the first 100 frames. That's its default time off value. We'll go to the right, changing the off time to 300. Okay, under the damping characteristics, we can now control the amount and direction of the dragging down effect. Why don't we do this? Before making our adjustments, we'll stop our playback, then scale our timeline back to reading only 70 frames. Now, you can do that by holding down the Control and Alt keys and then dragging to the right with your right mouse button. You'll do that dragging directly on top of the frames you read down on the timeline. When you're done, you're going to want to end up with a total of right around 70 frames. Okay, we can now resume our playback and go in for the controls. Let's change both the X and Y linear damping axes to 1%. Then we'll change the Z-axis to 2%. So what this does is it creates a dampening effect a little less than the default values in all 3 directions. Now let's experiment with that Z-axis value. Let's try a setting of 5. So you can see that knocks it down even more going in the Z direction. Let's try 10. Here the particles are being beaten down even more. Then let's go back to a value of 2. Okay, with all 3 values now set in place, we'll stop our timeline. We'll then open up the time configuration dialog, changing our total number of frames back to 300. Now that option box can be opened by simply right-clicking on any of the arrows directly to the right of the timeline. In the settings, we'll go about halfway down on the left, changing end time to 300. After pressing enter, we can go ahead and click OK. Alright, let's now go back and play the full 300 frames in our animation. Okay, so that'll knock down our smoke a bit. We can now make a few further adjustments to our wind. Let's save our file as Project Smoko3, and we'll do that in our next video.